Yeah, I'm not saying that I specialize in stuffed animal dinosaurs or anything, but you can judge me if you want. But a lot of my videos, I'm sitting in the same chair, so I try to make them look different, right? Okay, I didn't find the list. I'm a little bit stubborn wanting to find a list and see what order I want to present it, but I had started making a list of the different subjects that should be the priority, if we're connected to reality for cabinet ministers. And some relate to other countries, and they same topics, but they wouldn't operate under those paradigms either. So, Prime Minister Carney, again, I'm grateful for your specialty in what you have. But unfortunately, everything is interconnected, and that's, as a systems thinker, I can tell you, you can't get away from that. So you have to accept the fact that there are other subjects that you will have to, or you'll have to find people that are willing to become, because they're very unlikely not already, if they're in politics, specialists at. So one of the things, for example, is that would be good for Canada, and that you could assign a cabinet minister to undertake as a project. And if there are ways that you can make these longer than a typical 4-year term type projects, for example, incorporate funding for people that work as teams for these cabinet ministers, where these research teams continue, even if your government changes or the cabinet minister changes topics under a different government or whatever. Remember, you got to think in the long term, right? And the long term is again interconnected with everything, not just where Canada stands economically or politically stable. So Canada would benefit from returning to, and it wasn't like excelling at this, but it did have a reputation, I would say, in the past of being, part of the UN, where we would enter zones where we would kind of try to bring peace, right? As peacekeepers, and that means having, conflict resolution and mediation skills. Right now, you may be aware that out of social momentum, because elites can't think outside of their little boxes, is the United States of America are playing a lot of foreign interference games in wanting to be the peace deal brokers of things, that they're often if you study history, especially in the way that is not in the books, but that is from people who talk about it because they're old enough and they were advisors to previous governments. Again, I say Jeffrey Sachs as one, and you'll see the U.S. is largely the undermining force for what's happening in Ukraine and with Russia. So, but again, I'm not saying there wasn't any other future determining factors among those cultures, but they were manipulated in a way for the U.S. to have people fight their wars for them. It's a very manipulative way, and we have been, Canada, manipulated into fighting enemies of the USA, because they put people in power, they change their minds, they bring a weapon there, the weapons change hands, and it gets stolen or resold. Just the concept of weapons or force or criteria that relates to enriching the elites right now as part of peace deals, is ridiculous. Plus, none of them at this stage of our history as a devolving species will stick. So what would stick is the concept of peace. And peace has to be not in force, but win-win. So hoping that you can find cabinet ministers who understand this and who would say, hey, you know how we're going to put money in the Canadian Armed Forces is we're going to train people in the social sciences of being conflict resolution, world-class experts, mediation experts, peace brokering, which means win-win scenarios, which means I could give them training as a life skills coach, because life skills coaches teach how to reference others, right? And that means If you can't do that, you can't make a win-win scenario. So think about that. Think about having a cabinet minister that puts the money that either our citizens or other countries that are allies to us expect us to put in, but that relate to the concept of establishing peacekeeping forces and being an expert in it in the way of creating win-win scenarios. And that means, that we don't have to wait for conflicts to show up, as we can find out more of what is beneficial for, let's say, Russia or China, and say, well, we have these similarities, and how can we create with these struggles or strengths or weaknesses or conflicts that we have, or instabilities in how we could be more self-sustaining, more away from what it looks like, the very, very toxic culture of the USA, which is not going to change. If suddenly Trump dies, it's not going to change. I mean, he did get voted in because, a big portion of his population are unwell. And part of what made them unwell was for a long time thinking they were, God's gift to this planet. Now, of course, if their leaders say, God bless America, it's pretty scary, It's not as bad that Elizabeth May mentions the Lord and things like that, but it's still the same ideologies, and that's not where peace lies. It's not like sharing a supernatural deity, because people like that always turn against each other, even if they follow the exact same book. So it has to be about the science of peace and conflict resolution.